Hey everybody, it's Kyle. Welcome to managing your out of control child or teen on the autism spectrum. I just noticed I'm looking a little haggard. It's been a busy day. My wife hurt her back a couple days ago, so I'm trying to do double, triple duty and make sure I'm still a good husband and take care of my wife as I do all these things. So things are going a little rapidly for me. So what I want to start with is let you know some of the things we're going to talk about. We're not going to go into too much detail. We just don't have time, and I don't want this thing to be 8 hours long. But we are going to cover some real core basic things that are really going to help you if you're in a couple of different situations. And let me kind of describe those situations. And one is, let's say your 3, 4, 5-year-old toddler is kicking, scratching, pinching, headbutting, taking a snow globe that's solid, throwing it in a room and hitting his dad in the head and knocking him unconscious. The reason I say that so specifically is because that's happened to me, as well as the other ones: pinching, drawing blood, hitting, scratching. I've got 2 sons on the spectrum, and I've experienced a lot of these things early on. And I want to talk to you about some of the things that you can do to manage that so that as they grow, it doesn't become worse, because it surely can become worse. So, like I said, we're not going to go into too much detail. We do some more detail in the Insiders group, and you can click on that link after this is over if you're interested in that. But there's 3 things I want to start with here. I get contacted all the time by people who say, how do I stop my son or daughter from this? And I want to start by telling you, number 1, there's no magic bullet. I wish I could give you a pill, or your son or daughter a pill that would make it stop. That's not the way this works. If that's what you're expecting, you're at the wrong live event. And if that's what you expect, man, I don't know. I just don't even think that's realistic, right? So I want you to know there's no magic bullet. And I'll tell you a little story about my son, Ricky. He's the younger of my 2 that's on the spectrum. When he was about 2 or 3, he didn't like to go to church, and that probably shouldn't surprise you. Sitting down quietly for an hour is a tough thing for typical kids. Oh, sorry about that. Somebody just called me. I'm using my cell phone to record this. So let me start with that again. So Ricky didn't like to be at church, and so we gave him some things to keep him happy during church. Things like we'd give him clay to sit there and play with, and he could make all kinds of things, and we'd give him maybe a quiet little toy, a little Hot Wheel or something. Or we'd give him a pencil and paper and he liked to draw or, scribble things. There was all kinds of things we did to keep him quiet. But after a while he got in this habit of starting to talk too loud. Ricky's always been kind of a loudmouth, still is. And so he would start talking too loud, and I would lean over and I would say, shh. And he would say, no! And he would scream out, and it would shock me, and I would stop, right? And this is what had started to happen. He would get too loud, and I would say, shh, and he would say, no, and scream in church, right? And everybody would look, and it was just shocking. And after a few minutes of this, almost immediately I thought, well, he's training me not to tell him to be quiet. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not playing that game. We're in church. He needs to be reverent, and he needs to be quiet. So my wife and I devised this plan, and it was kind of on the fly initially, but we really locked it down after that first Sunday. And it went like this. If Ricky got too loud, I would say, shh. And if he yelled at me, I would take his clay or his pencil and paper, and I would set it on the chair, and I would pick him up and walk him outside. And outside in the foyer, there was a trash can that had a flat top on it, and the sides you could put trash in. I would set him there, and I would say, whisper. And he would say, whisper. And I would say, no, whisper. And he would say, whisper. And I'd say, no, whisper. And he would say, whisper. And I would say, good boy. And I'd hug him, and I'd take it back in and give him his clay back and his pencil and paper, whatever he had. And he would go back to his business. And then he would get loud again, and I'd say, whisper. And he would say, no! And I'd take him out and do the exact same thing. Now, when we went out in the foyer and I set him on the chair, he didn't like that. There was other kids playing around. He wanted to hop down. I wasn't going to let him do that. I would just hold him there gently, and I would say, and I would keep saying, whisper, until he said it back, and then we'd go back in. And I'm not kidding you. One Sunday, I must have taken him out 15 times in the first 20 minutes. It was constantly back and forth. And this went on for, I'm not kidding you, to me it seemed like 10 years. My wife says it was more like 5, right? But at one point on one Sunday morning, 5 years later, we're sitting in church, and he gets a little loud, and I say, whisper. He says, whisper. And he had been doing this occasionally and not yelling out. And one Sunday, church was over, and I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and we realized he hadn't gone out. And I'm telling you, tears welled up in our eyes because it worked. We couldn't believe it, right? And it only took 5 years, right? And the interesting thing is now he's reverent in church to this day. I'm lucky now. He's about 6'2", and he's a big strapping, strong kid at 15 years old. He's even an usher at church now. And whenever people walk in, they're talking a little loud, guess what he'll tell them? Whisper. It's a great thing. He's an usher at church. He's one of the most reverent kids at church. It's amazing. People walk in and they say to me, hey, Kyle, you are so I know your kid's on the autism. Isn't Ricky on the autism spectrum? I say, sure. You're so lucky. He's so reverent. Oh, yeah, I'm real lucky. In my mind, I'm thinking, you have no idea how hard I work. And they think it's lucky. And I say, you know what? You're right. I'm lucky, right? So what you need to understand is there's no magic bullet. This stuff takes work. When these kids go down these paths, sometimes it takes work to straighten up that path for them. So that's number one. Number two is you'll ask yourselves, why are they doing this? Well, let me just explain to you why. They're kids. They're selfish. It's who they are. It's what they're supposed to be. They're trying to figure things out, right? My wife has this theory she calls velociraptors. My wife says, kids are velociraptors. I say, what do you mean by that? She says, did you ever see Jurassic Park? I say, sure. She says, do you remember they reanimated all these dinosaurs and they had them walking around the park and there was commons and herbivores and the velociraptors were vicious, right? It's who they are. And so they put them in this big cage and they put barbed wire around it and they electrified it. And the velociraptors would systematically test the fences and shock themselves to find the weakness. She says, kids are like velociraptors. They're systematically testing us to find the weaknesses. And once they find that weakness, they're going to tear that fence down and they're going to run the island, right? And that's what they're trying to do. It doesn't mean they're bad. They're kids. They're testing us. They're testing to see if we'll be consistent, what they can get away with, where the weaknesses are. You know, some of the biggest weaknesses we have when we're tired, right? Or when they outlast us, when they whine and whine and whine. And we can't take it anymore, so we say, okay. And what happens? We've just taught them there's a weakness in that fence, right? So kids are velociraptors. So that's the second thing you need to understand. And they're always going to be that way. By the way, they're especially velociraptors when they're teenagers, 14, 15, 16. They are going to test you like you wouldn't believe. Now is the time when they're younger. If yours are already that age, we're still going to talk about that too. But you want to create some barriers that are impenetrable, and we'll talk about how to do that. The third thing is your problem is going to be solved or made worse by how you define your kids on the spectrum. Now, if you're the person that says, thinks they're, how's the best way to say this? I don't want to say it. If you blame it on autism, or, well, it's just who he or she is, or if you think they're frail and incapable, then you're really not going to be doing them much good, okay? If you define them that way, what you're going to end up with kids is kids that are running their homes. Kids that parents can't go anywhere. They can't take them anywhere. They can't do anything because these kids have pushed and pushed and pushed and are really just tearing. I'm exaggerating here, but you know what I'm talking about. We lived in a situation where we couldn't go anywhere or do anything. We couldn't leave our kids with anybody. We had to watch them every second of every day because they were doing things that were so outrageous. And the long-term effects of that are really bad. Kids that start to get violent when they hit puberty and start to push and shove and get physical with their parents. It's really bad. And I'll tell you real quickly, even high-functioning kids that are on the spectrum, there's really bad side effects to not creating those loving, kind barriers for your kids. I went to a conference a few years ago, and I did a presentation, and afterwards I had 3 young men come up to me, and they were probably in their mid-20s. And through broken English, the most verbal of the 3 of them said, I wish my parents knew what you were teaching. And I said, why is that? And he said, because then they would have loved me. And I said, what? And he said, they would have loved me. I said, how can you say they didn't love you? He said, well, it's because there was so much turmoil in my home and so much chaos, and it was because of me. They didn't love me because I was the one causing it. And I said, wait a minute, whoa, whoa. The reason there was so much turmoil is they didn't know what to do. And they were doing everything they knew how. And he said, no, I was the problem. Right? So what can happen is these kids, if you don't start to manage this in a way that's productive for them, is they can go down this path where there's so much chaos and so much turmoil in your home, and they may or may not be causing it, but with the way we're managing it adds to the stress and tension in the home. And if it gets too bad, these kids might think, and these kids, I couldn't talk them out of it, that their parents didn't love them and they would be better off there, or not born because of the problems and the turmoil they caused in the home. And no matter how much I talked to this young man and said, no, your parents love you, they just didn't know what to do. They were doing their best. They tried their hardest. And he wouldn't believe it. And that's the last thing we want to do, is for our kids to think we don't love them because of the stress and tension in our homes and the way we manage it. So that's the third thing. So here, let's just talk about real quick. I'm going to get right into it. Here is why they do what they do. Okay? Why does your kid headbutt? Why does he pinch you? Why does he scratch? Why does he do this? Because it works. Now you might be saying, wait. What? It works. Why do any of us do anything? It's because it works. We don't do things that don't work. Right? So if things work, we'll continue to do them. And because they're always testing, and some of our kids don't really have the mental capacity to understand you can't just walk up and smack somebody in the face. And if you do and you get what you want, or you get the right result that you're expecting as a kid, it works. And they'll continue to do that, and they'll ramp it up, and they'll keep doing things that work. So we've trained them that these things work. Now that's a harsh reality. It was for me. When I started to realize that he's doing these things because they work, I had to say, okay, well, I've got to figure out a situation where it does not work anymore. And that's going to be hard. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So there's two reasons, there's two ways that we're teaching them that these things work. Okay? The first one is unclear rules and consequences. Okay? And let me explain that. You can make a rule for your son or daughter, and they can break that rule, and you can be just too tired to fight them tonight. Well, guess what? They found a weakness in the fence. The Velociraptors have broken the fence down and are now running the island, right? They know that's going to work if they can get you in a tired state. Another way they can do it is to press your hot buttons, right? Have you ever had a child tell you, I hate you? What does that do to mom, right? Mom says, oh my gosh, she hates me. And mom goes into meltdown mode. And now the kid is on a level playing field, right? And he can go right into Velociraptor mode and just take over the island. Or they shove, or whatever it is they do that gets you out of sorts. They press those hot buttons because they know if they can press them and press enough hot buttons, and they'll try different things, right? I wish I was never born. Ever hear that one? I'll kill myself. I'll kill you, right? These are things that throw us into a tizzy, and when we go into a tizzy, there's a weakness in that fence, and they spot that, and they'll continue to do things because they work. So, unclear rules and consequences, right? And the second thing is inconsistent enforcement. A lot of us can enforce rules up until we get really tired, right? Or we've had a hard day. Or we ask our spouse to do it and they don't want to do it either, and we don't want to do it and it doesn't get done. What does this tell our kids? It teaches them they can use each other against us, right? Now again, I don't want you to think they're bad kids. They're not. It's what they do. That's what kids do. That's what they do. Even typical kids will do these kind of things. The difference is the kids on the spectrum don't have the same mental capacity. They can't make those connections as quickly, and so we have to work a little bit harder, maybe a lot harder as parents, to really set those boundaries in place. Now, I want to tell you the answer to this, right? So it's unclear rules and consequences, both good and bad, and it's inconsistent enforcement. So here's what I'm going to say is the answer, okay? And should I write this down? So, okay, I don't have to write it down. I'm looking for hard. If the answer to this is a contract that you write, okay? Now, you might ask yourself, well, my son or daughter's not going to sign a contract. It's not for them. It's for you. It's for you and your spouse. You write a contract. You say, if this happens, here's the steps we're going to take, right? If Johnny headbutts Mom, here's the exact things we're going to take every time, right? If Johnny comes up and doesn't headbutt Mom, right, there's a consequence for that too. There's a big giant hug, right? Do you remember when I talked about Ricky? What did I do after he whispered? I hugged him real tight, right? When I was in church sitting next to him and I said, whisper, and he said, whisper. Guess what I did? I hugged him real tight, right? That's a consequence of him doing the right things at the right time. We need to create those positive consequences as well as those negative consequences. The problem is we're willy-nilly about it, right? We think we have rules, but man, these kids are experts at finding loopholes or little spots they can tweak in our rules, and then we can't, well, I can't, you know, is it autism or is it bad behavior? I'll be honest with you, with my son, I don't really care sometimes, okay? Because he still needs to learn that he needs to manage himself better. Even if he does have autism, he needs to manage himself in a way that he can function in society. If I teach him by the way I do things in my home that he can punch me in the head when he doesn't like something, guess what happens? He goes outside the home and he punches somebody in the head. And you know what? The world does not love our kids like we love them. You know what? We'll show mercy. We'll hug them and we'll still love them. You know what the world will do? The world will throw them in jail. And we don't want that. We have a responsibility to set up these rules and set up a system so that we can manage ourselves in a way that teaches these kids what works. And those things need to be proper things. You know, I was talking to a lady just a couple days ago, and she said to me, well, I put him in timeout, but he won't stay. Anybody else had that problem? Of course, right? Here's what a kid's doing. You put him in timeout, he runs off. He's Velociraptor. He's testing to see if he can get away, right? Now, if you go, now be warned here. If you go and grab him and you put him in there and you hold him in there, what are you teaching him? You're an adult, and you're teaching him that if you want somebody to do what you want, then you can physically make them do it. What does that lead to? It leads to them becoming adults and saying, I'm an adult. If I want somebody to do something, I can physically make them do it. Not a good lesson, right? We really need to make sure that we put them back in timeout, but we say, you know what, we're not done, and it's going to take a few more minutes. And if they run off, we walk over there and we bring them back and we sit them down in timeout. And if they run off, we walk over there, and if they run off 25 times, we bring them back 25 times. And we sit them there and we say, you know what, the only reason I'm doing this is because we can't act like that. And when we do, this is the clear rule and consequence consistently. Okay? Now, you may have teens. You may have testosterone flowing. I understand. I had a son one time that was so mad at me, he was spit screaming in my face. And he was beating his chest and he said, I'm a man, in my face. Right? And guess what would have happened if I had tipped and screamed back? I would have taught him that when somebody screams at him, you should scream back, and you should scream louder. And what if I'd have grabbed him and gotten physical? What would I have taught him? That the bigger physical person can win the confrontation. Okay? We can't do that, right? He screamed and yelled in my face, and I said, son, I don't scream at you. Please don't scream at me. Now, it takes a lot of strength to do that. I know it's easy to talk about, not so easy to do. Those are some of the things we cover in our Insiders group. Again, we don't have a tremendous amount of time on this, but I do want you to know it's not only possible, but it's probable if you'll work hard and train yourself. Write a contract. Where's my pen? Contract. If you have a spouse, write down the things they do that are unacceptable. Say, what are we going to do every time? Consistent enforcement. There's unclear rules and unclear expectations and inconsistent enforcement of those rules and expectations. And when we do that, we're teaching them they can do whatever the crap they want. And they want, and they're kids, they're not being bad. They're testing those fences. They will rule your home. You'll have so much stress and tension in your home. that it'll cause problems with you and your spouse. It'll cause problems with you and your typical kids. That's not what we want to do. And they'll grow up to think this craziness is the norm. This stress and tension, right? And anything they want, they can get. And if they smash an iPad, guess what? You go buy them another one because you don't want to fight the fight. You don't want to create new rules and be consistent with those rules. Listen, I know it's hard. I know it's hard. And I want to warn you, they are going to revolt. You're going to be tired. Write your contract and decide up front, I don't care how tired I am. This equals this every time. Let me tell you what you get if you'll do this. Okay? You get a family where your kids want to come home from college because they love being there. Right? We've got 2 sons that are on the autism spectrum. Do they still have meltdowns occasionally? Yeah. They're velociraptors. They're testing fences, right? They're going to see forever, right? But we're teaching them. And guess what? They know what behavior is acceptable. And they know there's a consequence. If they break a rule, there's a good chance we're going to go up and write on their calendar, you don't get this for the next 6 days. And write X's on 6 days. And guess what happens? They physically see that. They make that connection and they say, again, sometimes it takes a long time. It's not easy. But it's so worth it. Okay? The last thing we want, Mom and Dad, is our kids to start hitting age of puberty and start getting bigger and stronger. You know sometimes when you grab a kid and put him where you want him right now, oh my gosh, be careful. Be careful. We've got to be careful we're not teaching them that that's what adults do. Because they're going to think they're an adult when they're 14 and 15. And if that's what they think adults do, that's what they're going to do. And when you tell them you can't, they're going to say, you did? Right? Guys, here's the key. That's the real big problem we have as parents. Unclear rules and consequences. Again, not just bad consequences, good consequences too. We've got to give them the good consequences. Hug the crap out of them when they do what's right. You know, early this week, my son didn't want it. He just graduated. He didn't want to go back to school. We figured out a way to get him there. And I'm telling you, when he got home and I said, how was your day at work? He said, good. I'm telling you, he doesn't even like me to hug him. I didn't care. I'm hugging him. I am pouring happiness and joy on him when he does what's right and when he makes good decisions. I asked him, where do you want to eat dinner? It's your choice. Because you did what's right. You get this. And he chose Costco, and we all went to Costco and had pizza for $20. All 6, 7, 8 of us, however many is in my family, I don't even know anymore, right? Here's the deal, guys. Consistent enforcement, clear rules and consequences. Write yourself a contract. If your kids are high functioning, if they can understand this stuff, they'll help you write it. Say, hey, listen, we want to figure this out. We don't want stress. You don't want stress. And you know what? We haven't been clear with what the rules are and what the expectations are. It's our fault, son, daughter. Here's what we're going to do. And if they're high functioning, say, what do you think we should do in this case? What's a reasonable thing to do? What's a reasonable reward? Right? They'll help you write the contract. And then you write it and you stick to it and they stick to it. If they're nonverbal, if it doesn't matter, write the contract. Read it to them. And say, here's what we're going to do, and do it. Mom and Dad, listen. The reason I do these videos is because we have this happy family that's thriving in chaos. If you think there aren't still meltdowns, you're wrong. There was one last week, and it was pretty bad. But we managed it in a way that let our son know we love him. And that our other kids understood what's going and aren't scared and afraid. And as soon as I was done upstairs and I came downstairs, my daughter said, I love you, Daddy. Because she knew I was doing what I needed to do, and she knew we wanted to keep happiness and joy in our home and lower the tension and lower the stress. And when you do that, automatically happiness starts to replace those things. That's what we want for your family. That's how to manage your out of control toddler, child, teen. Okay? Let me cover them one more time. Do you remember what they were? Clear rules and consequences. Consistent enforcement. 2 things. Clear rules and consequences, consistent enforcement. The contract, write it. Take some time. Sit down with your spouse. If it's just you single moms, this will work for you too. Write it. Read it to your son or daughter. Talk to your other kids about it, right? I mean, you can write contracts for your typical kids. It's a great idea. That way you can be consistent with discipline all the kids. Imagine that. Imagine a typical son that doesn't think it's unfair that the other kid gets away with crap. Ever hear that before? Yeah, you're right. Happens all the time. Listen, I'm here for you. I want you to thrive. That's what we do. If you want to learn more or a lot more details on this kind of stuff, it's what we cover in our Insiders group. Just go click on the link and download a guide, read about us. You can schedule a time to talk to me. I just got off the phone 15 minutes before I started with this with somebody, and it was a great conversation. I'm so excited to talk with you guys and learn about your lives and share some of these tips and techniques. So that's how to manage your kids that are out of control. I know not always out of control, just sometimes way out of control, right? Nobody's kids are always out of control. But the point is this: let's do what's right for our families. Let's do what's right for our kids. I know it takes work. There is no magic bullet. It's going to be hard. But the benefits and the final effect of it is much more powerful than anything you can imagine. Hey, do it. Let me know how I can help. I'll talk to you next time. See you later.